SEP Fanfic Readings presents Finding Hermione by ebookdragon. Chapter 36. The Aftermath. January 14th. "Get me out of here, Draco." Hermione's panicked plea echoed throughout Draco as he wondered how he was going to get them out of the crowded courtroom. The doors had opened, and the press and spectators were milling about, all seeking a piece of them. The Weasleys wouldn't fare any better. The media would feast on their grief as if it were Christmas dinner. His mother cast a worried frown in Hermione's direction. "How are we going to get her out of here?" she asked quietly. "And someone needs to make a statement, or they'll spin it however they want if we don't." Harry heard her. Draco watched as the bespectacled man looked down at Hermione and then towards the closed side door that the minister had just walked out of. He must have come to the same conclusion because he nodded to himself and spoke in a quick, matter-of-fact voice, issuing orders like a general. "Right. Angus, you stay with Narcissa. Artie, you go over to the Weasleys. Tell them that Bill or Charlie will stay behind, and I'll be back to take the rest out of here, after I see Hermione and Draco off." He turned to Draco. "Let's go. I'll take you through the door to the minister's private flue." His mother moved down the center of the aisle with Angus flanking her. The two of them distracted the press long enough for Harry, Draco, Hermione, and Artemis to move. Harry, Draco, and Hermione hurried along the side door and stepped through just as the press caught on to the move. They disappeared in a flurry of camera flashes. The blinding light from the cameras temporarily made it difficult for them to see as they stepped into the dark room. The glow of a fireplace in the corner offered the only illumination. From what Draco could make out, the room was a cozy study littered with books, plush armchairs, and spindly tables. A desk was hiding over in an opposite corner, with mounds of parchment stacked high in a pyramid of rolls. "Let's go," Harry said, hurrying them along. "Harry," Draco said to get his attention, "make sure my mother gets home safely. Have her pick up Rose from school and keep her at the manor until we come to get her." Harry nodded. "I'll have Angus stay with her until they're both at the manor." Draco took a pinch of flue powder and threw it into the fireplace. The flames changed from their merry reds and oranges to a more sinister green, reflecting Draco's mood. He thought he would be happier to see Weasley gone, and a part of him was. The other part knew that imprisonment wasn't enough for the harm Weasley had wreaked on those around him. "Thanks, mate," Draco said as he and Hermione stepped into the fireplace. He called out for the study at Spinner's End, and in a nauseating swirl they were back home. Hermione reeled as she stepped out of the fireplace. Draco caught her before she toppled to the ground, and then picked her up. Hermione's lack of protest at being carried like a weak-kneed damsel in distress, as Draco was sure she would have said, was starting to worry Draco. He vaguely wondered if he should call for a healer as he carried her up the stairs to their room. He sat her down on the settee at the foot of the bed and kneeled before her to take off the black pointed-toe pumps. She stared blankly around, not taking in her surroundings. "Hermione," Draco spoke softly. He wanted some reaction, be it tears or anger. He didn't rightly care which. Anything would be better than the catatonic state she was currently in. He started pulling out the hundreds of pins that were instrumental in holding up her hair. He winced when he pulled one out and ended up pulling on her hair. The pain in her scalp seemed to reanimate Hermione, and she swatted his hands away and started pulling the pins out herself. The rapid plink of the pins landing in the bowl beside the settee, the only sound in the room. Draco toed off his shoes and draped his robes and suit jacket over the blue damask chair in the corner of the room. He climbed up on the bed and moved to sit behind her with her resting between his outstretched legs. "Hermione, talk to me," he said when she leaned back against him. "He's gone," she said quietly. "Yes," he answered slowly. "I hadn't dared to hope. I thought I would be happier about it." She turned to look up at him, her eyes full of question. "Is it odd that I'm not happier about him being sent to prison?" Draco caressed her cheek, letting his fingers trail down the silky smooth skin of her neck. "I guess that would depend on the reason you're sad," he answered her. "I remember the boy he used to be, and I start to wonder where it all went wrong. I'm sad things couldn't have been different, that he didn't make better choices." "You gave him plenty of chances. You gave him more chances than he deserved," Draco said kindly. Tears started to fall down Hermione's face now. He wrapped himself around her, and she turned and sobbed into his neck. "He did things to me, Draco," she cried. Draco gripped her tighter against his chest as if he could pull the pain from her body into his if he could only get her closer. "I'm sorry," he murmured into her hair. She went on. A part of me wants to know what he did." Draco shuddered at the thought. Whatever Weasley had done was bad enough to make Harry want to kill him. Draco didn't want to know. Didn't want to be tempted to end Weasley's life. He didn't want Hermione to know either. Hermione could be by far the scariest of them all. The things she could do to Ronald Weasley would probably make old Voldy look like a pretty all-right dude. She hiccuped and continued. "The other part of me thinks that we're all better off not knowing. I don't know what to do. What should I do?" Draco looked down into those beseeching eyes. He could tell her to let it go, to put the horrors that Weasley committed behind her. Right now, she probably would do it. He hated that he had to do the right thing and not tell her those things. "I can't make that decision for you," he said softly. Draco kissed the top of her head and held her so tightly he thought he might bruise her. She started crying silently now. He felt like they sat that way for hours, perched uncomfortably at the end of the bed. He was pretty sure he would have a bruise where Hermione's shoulder was pressed into his chest. "I don't know what to do," she said finally. Her voice was hoarse from crying and for being quiet for so long. "You don't have to make a decision right now," he answered. "I need a bath," she said, abruptly changing subjects. "A bath?" Draco asked dumbly. She wriggled out of his embrace and stood in front of the settee. Her hair was a disheveled mess. Tear tracks ran down her face. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She ran her hand nervously up and down one arm. "I need to wash him away," she said. "Okay," Draco agreed. Draco slid off the end of the bed and onto the settee, then stood up behind her. He took her hand and led her into the bathroom. He let go of her hand and started the water running in the large, white porcelain soaker tub. He summoned her body wash and squeezed some of the liquid into the filling tub. The warm smell of lavender and jasmine soon filled the air. He turned to find Hermione struggling with the zipper at the back of her dress. He went over to her and pulled the tab down. Hermione drew her arms out of the sleeves, and the dress slithered to the floor. He opened the clasps of her bra, and that followed the dress in a heap on the floor. Hermione stood facing the mirror over the vanity, clad only in her knickers, white lacy things today. Draco drew them down her legs, past her knees, until they fell on their own to the floor. She kicked them into a pile of clothes near her feet. Draco came to stand behind her, still clothed in his dress shirt and slacks. He brushed his fingertips down the side of her neck, across the tops of her shoulders, and along one arm. He was careful not to brush his bare hand across her cuff. He didn't think the desire that it caused to wash over the both of them would be helpful in this situation. "You are so beautiful," he remarked quietly. "Does this change anything for you?" she asked hesitantly. He turned her so that she faced him and tipped her chin up so that she was forced to look at him. "Nothing will ever diminish my love for you or our children." He placed a gentle kiss on her lips, then returned to gazing at her. "I will love you forever. I will desire you until the last breath leaves my body." She slumped in relief, then shook herself and stood straighter. Draco could see her starting to pull the fractured pieces of herself back together, the beginning of the rebuilding process. He helped her settle into the warm depths of the bath, bubbles floating up languidly out of the aromatic waters, and popped. He brought the little white tufted stool from her vanity bench and sat down beside the tub. Draco stripped off his white dress shirt and threw it into the pile of clothes in front of the vanity. Hermione soaked in the bath with her eyes closed, only her head and part of her neck visible above the waterline. Tendrils of her curls floated in the water, looking a bit like snakes swimming in the water. "What are you thinking?" Draco asked. Hermione didn't open her eyes to look at him. She answered in a sad voice. "I'm thinking that I deserved it, what Ron did to me." Draco choked a bit on his indignation, and that she would think she deserved whatever horrors Weasley might have inflicted on her. "Why on earth would you think that?" he asked, probably a little harsher than he intended. She answered slowly. "After what I did to my parents, I took away their choice to decide whether to stay or go." Draco took up a sponge and started to wash her. He couldn't refrain from touching her anymore, not after what she'd said. He ran the sponge up the arches of her feet, lightly massaging one before he let the foot drop back down into the water. "That's not the same, Hermione," he protested. Hermione hummed a little in contentment as he started to work his way up her calves. Her voice was still sad as she answered, "I still took away their memories, sent them away, made them forget that they had a daughter." Draco started talking with soothing sincerity. He wanted to wash away all her troubles. He let the sponge glide soothingly over her skin as he spoke to her. "What he did to you, it's not the same. He didn't take those memories away to protect you. Whatever else he did and wiped from your mind, it wasn't because he loved you and was trying to protect you. It was to protect himself, or to feed some sick part that he was hiding from everyone." Draco moved to stand behind her and had her lean forward. He rubbed the sponge up and down her back. "You have to forgive yourself. What you did to your parents came from a place of love. You were right to fear for their safety. Your parents were not safe here. They would have been hunted, taken to try to draw you out. You have no idea how much it frustrated the Death Eaters that they couldn't find you three." Hermione nodded, accepting the truth of his words. He would know. He'd been there with the Death Eaters, knew their movements and frustrations. After Draco finished scrubbing her back, he moved aside her damp hair and washed and rinsed her neck and shoulders. She tilted her head back to look up at him as she reclined back against the tub. The sadness in her eyes was starting to ebb a little. He hated seeing the anguish on her face, hated hearing her blame herself for protecting her parents. "I know you're right," she said finally. She heaved a deep sigh. "It's just hard. We knew that Ron took away my memories to hide his affair with Lavender and to cover up Minerva's fall off the broom. I don't think I wanted to contemplate that there could be more." Draco leaned down and kissed her forehead. "It's okay if you don't want to know the rest," he said gently. "He's gone, never coming back. You're safe. The girls are safe. I dare say Lavender and her children are better off too." Hermione sighed again. This one seemed more of relief and relaxation than the others. She sunk deeper into the water. He settled back onto the stool and let her float in the tub. Only her face and the top of her breasts and toes peeked above the waterline. After a while, her face started to relax visibly. Draco was probably being fanciful, but he thought that he could actually see her shedding the spectre of Ronald Weasley. Her eyes opened, and he found himself looking into calm, chocolate depths. She looked more at ease than she had in days, weeks maybe. "Feel better?" he asked, shattering the silence in the bathroom. Hermione moved to sit up. Water sloshed onto the floor as she moved back into her seated position in the tub. Her curly hair was plastered to her head. Her hands clung to the sides of the tub. "He's gone," Hermione said in a quiet voice. "That's what matters right now. He can never hurt us again." Draco thought that maybe she would be reminding herself of that fact many times in the coming days and weeks. "We need to tell the children," Hermione said. "I don't want them finding out Ron's in jail through the papers." Draco helped Hermione out of the tub and pulled the plug to let the water drain away. He wished her pain at Weasley's actions would drain away as easily. While she dressed, he went downstairs to Flu the headmistress and let her know that they would like to visit with the children. She told them to come through before dinner time. The time came for Draco and Hermione to go to Hogwarts to talk to the children. They stepped into the headmistress's office and weren't that surprised to find Lavender Brown already there. They were, however, surprised to find Charlie and George Weasley flanking her on the sofa. Hermione greeted the three warmly. She and Lavender hugged one another for a long time before they let go. Draco shook the hands of the Weasley brothers and settled himself down on the couch across from them. Hermione sat down beside him after she finished hugging Lavender. Hermione looked between George and Charlie and finally asked, "I'm not surprised to see Lavender here, but why are you two here?" The brothers both wore comical expressions of disbelief. George seemed to regain himself quicker and pointed a finger between Hermione and Lavender. "Are you two friends now?" "We've come to an understanding," Lavender answered with a quiet smile. "Don't dodge the question," Hermione said, leaning back and threading her fingers through Draco's. Charlie settled back on the sofa and propped an ankle on his knee. The chain decorating his dragon-hide boots clinked. "Well, after you two made your dramatic escape, Harry was getting Mom and Dad out of the courtroom. Lavender here," Charlie said, gesturing with his thumb at Lavender, "didn't escape quickly enough and got mobbed by the press." "Oh, I'm so sorry, Lavender," Hermione said, her voice sounding contrite. "Don't worry about it," Lavender said, waving Hermione's apology away. "They would have been worse to you. I'm glad you didn't have to put up with that." "Anyway," George interrupted, "Charlie and Bill managed to shove their way to Lavender and got her behind the rest of us." "My glamours failed," Lavender whispered, looking down at her hands. "There was too much going on and I couldn't focus." Nobody said anything for a moment. Each seemed to contemplate the horrors they'd gone through in the courtroom. Draco wondered if pictures of Lavender's werewolf-scarred face would grace the pages of tomorrow's Prophet. Charlie cleared his throat and broke the silence. "There's nothing wrong with how you look," he said gruffly, then continued the story in a lighter tone. "So I took Lavender home and stayed with her to help her tell the kids about Ron." Lavender looked at Charlie with an interesting mixture of gratitude and testiness. He held her gaze, his face unreadable. Lavender finally looked away and backed down at her hands. Tension seemed to fill the room. The headmistress came through the door and broke up the tense moment. Fred Brown was on one side of her, and Minerva and Scorpius were on the other side. Lavender gasped audibly at Minerva's appearance. "She's a Malfoy," Hermione finished. Draco thanked the headmistress for letting them invade her office once again, before Lavender could say much else about Minerva's appearance. Hermione rose from the sofa and guided Draco, Minerva, and Scorpius over to the window alcove away from Lavender, Fred, Charlie, and George. Hermione drew both children into her embrace. Draco watched them as Hermione kissed the top of Minerva's head, then Scorpius. Minerva turned her head to cast him a worried glance as Hermione continued to embrace the children. Draco came forward and cupped a pale, blonde head in each hand. Minerva's hair was longer now. Her curls were starting to emerge as the ends of her hair brushed the tops of her shoulders. Scorpius needed a haircut. His straight, blonde hair was almost the same length of his sister's. Minerva extracted herself a little from Hermione's embrace. Scorpius stayed snuggled at Hermione's side, since Hermione hadn't loosened her hold on him. Draco and Hermione each kept a hand on Minerva, keeping her within the family circle. "Mum, what's going on?" Minerva asked, looking worried. She tried to cover up her fear by trying teasing tone as she said, "I don't think Headmistress McGonagall let you come up here for a hug." "Ron's trial was today," Hermione said, touching Minerva's cheek. "Is he—" Minerva started to ask, looking between Draco and Hermione in alarm and seeking reassurance. "He's in prison," Hermione said quickly, reassuringly. Minerva rushed back into Hermione's embrace. A cry of anguish coming from the couches resounded throughout the room. Draco looked over and saw Fred in Lavender's arms as she tried to calm her distraught son. Charlie and George both had a hand on Fred's back. Draco felt sorry for Fred. He knew what it was like to lose a father. He'd seen his own sent to prison twice. Lucius Malfoy hadn't been perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but there was never a doubt that he had loved Draco. "I'm glad he's gone," Minerva whispered vehemently. "He deserved it for hurting you." Minerva didn't elaborate on which you she meant, probably both Hermione and Draco. "Ron said some things. I don't know if the papers will report on it," Hermione said. Minerva and Scorpius both looked up at her. "What kind of things?" Minerva asked. Hermione shook her head. "You don't need to know all the details." She hesitated, then spoke again. "I don't think he was right in the head at the end." George approached them and called out, "Draco, Hermione, we'd like to talk to you all before Minerva kicks us out." Scorpius let go of Hermione and moved to stand beside Draco. He looked unsure. He also looked like he was trying to mask his uneasiness with an air of confidence. Ever the Malfoy. Draco smiled down at his son and placed a hand on his shoulder. He heard Minerva hiss to Hermione, "I don't want to be anywhere near Fred Brown." Hermione hissed back, "Be nice. The boy just lost his father." "He's better off without him," Minerva said, crossing her arms and coming to stand beside him. "He doesn't see it that way," Draco said, looking down at her with a stern expression. "So show a little compassion." Minerva harumphed with ill grace and kept her arms crossed over her chest. Scorpius looked mutinous at the thought of being nice to Fred Brown. Draco called to George. "We'll be right there." Draco crouched down to face both children with their twin white blonde hair and steel-gray eyes and matching expressions of self-righteous indignation. "You are Malfoys, and I expect you to both act like it. That boy over there is hurting. I know you don't like him. I know he said some horrid things to you when you first met, but you need to let that go." Draco looked at the aggrieved expressions of his children and added, "At least for now." "But, Dad!" Scorpius protested, drawing the words out in a long whine. Draco grasped both of their shoulders and shook them a little to get their attention. "None of that," he spoke harshly. "I was that boy at many times in my life. I was the conceited prat and the son who only wanted to make his father proud. I saw my father go to prison twice. I never got to see my father again after he was taken from the courtroom after his trial. The last time I hugged him was when we were in the holding cell awaiting our trials, none of us knowing what would happen. And I was so mad at him for getting us all into that mess. I said things that I regret to this day." Draco choked a little on his words and cleared his throat. He continued with a hoarse voice, "So show a little compassion for Fred Brown, because he just lost his father." Tears rolled down both children's cheeks. Minerva fiddled with the crest on her necklace. Hermione wrapped an arm around each child. She rubbed her hand on each child's arm in comfort. "Let's go over there." Hermione guided each child back over to the sitting area, leaving Draco to follow behind. She sat the children between her and Draco on the sofa. Draco looked at the occupants on the opposite sofa. Lavender still had her arms around Fred, who was still consumed by his grief over the loss of his father. Fred wept openly and loudly onto his mother's chest. Charlie, who was sitting beside the boy, kept a consoling hand on Fred's back and shot a warning glance at the two children. George looked over at them, and he cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I know this has been a trying day for everyone. Hermione, how are you holding up? You were looking a little pale when you left the courtroom." Hermione answered with a measured tone. "As you said, it was a very stressful day." "You're fine health-wise, at least?" George asked. Hermione smiled, the first genuine smile Draco had seen all day. "We're fine, George." Lavender shot a questioning look at Hermione. Hermione answered the look by saying, "Draco and I are expecting twins." "Oh, that's wonderful," Lavender said. "Congratulations. When are you due?" "The end of September, most likely." George looked over to Minerva. Tears were still streaming down the girl's face. Draco thought that it might be as a result of Fred's crying, than because she would miss Weasley. Draco felt himself tearing up a little just listening to the boy. His wailing had settled into a gentle sob, but that was still heart-wrenching to hear. "How are you holding up, Peanut?" George asked. Minerva shrugged. She hiccuped, then answered, "I'm fine." "It's okay to be sad that he's gone," Hermione said, tucking a lock of Minerva's hair behind her ear. "I'm glad he's in prison," Minerva said with vehemence. Fred lifted his tear-stained face from his mother's chest and glared at Minerva. "I hate you," he spat at her. "It's all your fault." "Fred, that is not true," Lavender admonished. "Apologize right now." Fred looked mutinously up at his mother. "No, she's not even sad that he's gone. She's got a new dad now, and she doesn't even care that her older one is gone." The Granger temper flared, and Minerva lunged for Fred before Draco could reach across and grab her. She crashed into Lavender and Fred, screeching like a banshee. Charlie, like a good dragon wrangler, wrapped a scarred and tattooed arm around Minerva's waist and hauled her off Lavender and Fred. "You're right! I don't miss him!" Minerva screeched as she flailed in Charlie's hold. "I hate him! He hurt my mom and I hate him!" Charlie set Minerva down, and she rushed back over to Hermione and buried her face in her mother's neck. Hermione wrapped her arms around Minerva and spoke quietly to the distraught girl. Charlie sat back down and made Fred turn and face him. His expression was thunderous. "I want you to listen to me and listen hard, boy. The only person responsible for your dad being gone is him. Ron made his choices, and he's paying for them. I understand you miss him, and I understand you being upset that he's gone, but that doesn't mean you can go around blaming other people for it. Minerva is a part of this family, same as you." "She's not my family. She's a Malfoy now," Fred replied sullenly. "Death eater scum just like them," and gestured at Draco and Scorpius. The boy was smacked upside the head quicker than anyone could react to his words. Lavender Brown bristled in fury. Her eyes took on a feral glint as she looked at her son. In her anger, Lavender lost control of her glamour, and it shimmered away, leaving the real Lavender exposed. Minerva and Scorpius gasped in shock at the scars on her face and neck. 4 long lines of pink, puckered scar tissue ran from Lavender's left cheekbone to her mouth. She had a deep, round scar above her right jawbone where Fenrir Greyback dug his thumb into her flesh and kept her from moving. Just visible beneath her hair were the scars of where he'd bitten her neck and the pitting of muscles that hadn't fully regrown. Draco didn't want to think about what her shoulder probably looked like. He and Hermione didn't recoil, though. Everyone bore scars from the war. "I did not fight and almost die in a war for my own son to be spouting bullshit, prejudicial ideas." Lavender growled at her son, the noise rumbling low in her throat, more wolf-like than Draco had ever heard the previously subdued woman. "You're no better than them because their family was on a different side. People make mistakes. People grow up not knowing any better." Fred looked ashamed-faced at the floor. "I'm sorry, Mom." Lavender's face gentled, and she stroked her son's face. I know you are, son. Your father was wrong to teach you those things, and I wasn't strong enough to stop him. It stops now, though. Fred nodded, still looking at the floor. Yes, Mum. You should apologize, Lavender said in a no-nonsense voice. Fred's head snapped up. Whatever protest he was about to make died as he took in his mother's expression. He turned to Draco and Scorpius. I'm sorry for calling you Death Eater scum, he said sullenly. We accept your apology, Draco said to the boy. He reached over and tapped Minerva on the shoulder. Apologize for attacking Lavender and Fred. Minerva shot him a reproachful glare. He met her glare with a raised eyebrow and a frown. Finally, she dropped her gaze and looked over to Lavender and Fred. She heaved a sigh of great reluctance and said quickly, I'm sorry I attacked you, even though— Enough, Draco interrupted sharply. He hated apologies with excuses or recriminations tacked onto them. Headmistress McGonagall bustled back into the room, surveying the group beneath her round glasses. I'm afraid it's time for the children to take their dinner. Everyone stood at the headmistress's entrance. The 3 children snapped to attention and started making their goodbyes. When Minerva came to hug him, he whispered for her to be nice and opened his palm to give her a green bead with the M on it for her bracelet. She hugged him again with a little more force this time. Scorpius got his hair ruffled by Draco, much to his annoyance, then smoothed back down by Hermione. Somehow, in the confusion of hugs, Draco found himself being hugged by Fred, which left them both feeling a bit awkward. See yourselves out, the headmistress said, not unkindly over her shoulder as she ushered the children back down to the great hall. You mean you're trusting us in here all by ourselves? George called mischievously after her. McGonagall narrowed her gaze at George, reconsidered leaving the notorious prankster alone in her inner sanctum, and pointed to the fireplace. Out, now, Mr. Weasley, she said sharply. Draco chuckled behind his hand, turning away from the headmistress. Hermione kept her expression serious, but he could see her struggling not to laugh. George Weasley bowed with a flourish. A pleasure as always, headmistress, and stepped into the fireplace. When George was gone, Hermione turned to Charlie. So, Charlie, how long are you in England for? Charlie smiled mysteriously. A few weeks. Then I've got to head back to Romania to wrap up some things before I can move back here. You're moving back? Hermione asked, looking pleased. I'm sure your mother will be so happy to have you back. Draco could tell Hermione was fishing. Lavender was looking to him for help, clearly begging him to take Hermione through the flu. Draco just smirked at her and let Hermione continue her interrogation. Lavender huffed in irritation and put her glamours back in place. Charlie sent her an exasperated look when he saw that she'd replaced the charms. Yes, Mum will be thrilled, Charlie answered. What made you decide to move back? Hermione persisted. Draco caught a look at her face. She was enjoying her interrogation. Told Lavender we'd be helping with her and the kiddos, Charlie answered. George has the shop and his own 3. Bill's busy with his kids, and Percy is— well, Percy. They all laughed at Charlie's assessment of Percy Weasley. Charlie shrugged and continued. I've wrestled dragons. How hard can a few sprogs be? That's kind of you, Hermione said, grinning at Lavender. Don't you dare give me that look, Hermione, Lavender said testily. What look? Hermione said, feigning innocence. Charlie started laughing, and Lavender turned on him, poking him in the chest. Don't you encourage her. I told you I didn't need you giving up your job to help us. We'll manage just fine on our own. Charlie swatted her hand away, his lip curling in a snarl. Draco watched as the dragon tattoos on Charlie's arms rippled when Charlie crossed his arms over his chest. Lavender growled back at him. You're not on your own, Charlie said heatedly. Did you think we were just going to forget about you and the kids when Ron went to prison? I do not need your charity, Lavender hissed. It's not charity, Charlie yelled, in a tone that indicated he'd probably said it 100 times throughout the course of the day to the witch. Weasleys take care of one another. My idiot brother may have led you to believe that we don't give a shit about family, but I'll be damned if I let you have to worry about taking care of 4 kids on your own. This is so fascinating, Hermione whispered to Draco. I've never seen Charlie yell at anyone. He's always so mellow. Turn the damn glamours off, Charlie yelled. I feel like I'm talking to a damn mask. I hate how people look at me, Lavender yelled back. Nobody's fucking here, Charlie shouted. I think they've forgotten about us, Hermione whispered. Draco barked out a laugh. 2 heads swiveled in his direction. Lavender snarled before she caught herself and apologized quickly. Charlie glared at her for apologizing. Still laughing, Draco said, As interesting as it is watching this lovers spat, we need to get home to Rose. Lavender edged away from Charlie. We aren't. That's not. He's not, Lavender sputtered. None of our business, Hermione said breezily, walking toward the fireplace. Though you could do worse. Hermione, Lavender protested. Draco took a pinch of flu powder and stepped into the fireplace with Hermione. He waved cheerily at the two co-parents as they spun away towards the manor. They stepped out of the fireplace in the receiving room of the manor and started wandering around looking for his mother and Rose. They laughed about the fight they'd witnessed between Lavender and Charlie as they walked along the halls. So, Charlie's going to help Lavender raise her kids? Draco asked. Hermione shrugged. Looks like it. And you're encouraging them to get together. You're the one that brought off the lovers spat, Hermione pointed out. That's what it looked like, Draco said. Don't you think it would look weird if Lavender ends up with Charlie Weasley? Hermione shrugged again. I don't think people are ever going to fully accept Lavender Brown, with the werewolf scars, her affair with Ron, and what happened to you at her home. The kids need a good father figure, and Charlie seems willing to step up. He doesn't seem to care about her scars either, Draco added. Seemed to get pissed that she covered them up. They found Rose and his mother in the picture gallery. Rose was standing in front of a large portrait, talking animatedly with a group of Malfoy wives. His mother reclined on a chaise lounge, laughing at Rose's antics. Draco cleared his throat to get their attention. Rose ran down the length of the gallery towards them, her arms outstretched and red curls flying around behind her. "Mummy! Daddy!" she called. She crashed into them, wrapping her arms around their knees. Draco placed a steadying arm around Hermione to keep her from falling as they returned Rose's hug. "Daddy, I knew you weren't in jail," Rose announced. Draco stared down at her, surprised that she would think he was in jail. He lifted her into his arms and balanced her on his hip. Hermione moved in front of him and asked Rose, "Why would you think Daddy's in jail?" Rose took a deep breath. "Timmy, from school, said that my daddy was going to jail. I told him that my daddy wasn't going to jail. He said he was." His mother came up to them. Rose got into a little scuffle with this boy, according to her teacher. "I beated him up," Rose said proudly. Draco laughed. He knew he shouldn't. Rose would think it meant she could get her way with resorting to violence when someone disagreed with her. He tried to school his face into a serious expression. Hermione looked sternly at him when his mouth quavered again, and laughter threatened to spill out. "Rose, you cannot beat up other children," Hermione admonished. Rose pouted down at her mother. "He said my daddy was going to jail. He's wrong. My daddy's right here. Daddy will take me to school tomorrow, and I will show Timmy he's stupid." "Don't call people stupid," Hermione scolded. She pinched the bridge of her nose. "Timmy wasn't talking about Draco, honey," Hermione started. "He was talking about your other father." "Oh," Rose said quietly. "He went to jail because he hurt Daddy." "That's right," Draco nodded. "Is he coming back?" Rose asked. "I'm afraid not," Hermione answered. Rose cuddled into his neck. "That's sad. Fred, Lydia, Danny, and Art won't have a daddy now." Rose looked up at him. "Are you going to be their daddy too?" "No," Hermione said quickly before the idea could latch on. "Uncle Charlie is going to help Lavender with Fred, Lydia, Arthur, and Daniel." His mother looked at Hermione's pronouncement curiously. "I didn't think the Weasleys still kept with the old ways," she murmured. Draco set Rose down so that she could run back to talk to the portraits. After she got out of earshot, Hermione asked, "What do you mean?" "Well, when a wizard died, leaving a widow and young children, the remaining family members usually made sure that the remaining parents had help, and the children were well cared for. If there was a single brother, it was customary for the wizard to marry his brother's widow and take over raising the children." "Levirate marriage," Hermione murmured. "Customary in patriarchal societies." "Exactly," his mother said, "though that doesn't apply in Lavender Brown's case, since she was never married to Ronald Weasley, and he's not dead, unfortunately. Technically, you would be the one Charlie would try to marry." Draco growled at the suggestion that Charlie Weasley would try to take Hermione from him over some archaic family practice. His mother laughed at his possessiveness. "I don't think he's going to try for Hermione, since there's a claim already made. But it does make sense that they would make sure that Lavender and her children were taken care of. They are in more need than Hermione and her girls." "Does Lavender have any choice in all this?" Hermione again looked worried. "Of course," his mother answered. "Marriage is always usually left up to the witch and wizard involved." "Seems a little gross for a wizard to be having relations with his brother's wife," Hermione said. "It's all a matter of perspective, Hermione," his mother chided. "It's perfectly normal for large families, like the Weasleys." Draco interrupted before Hermione could get into a full-on crusade mode. "I'm hungry," he whined. "Anybody else hungry? Because I'm starving right now." Lavender Brown could look after herself. She seemed to have Charlie Weasley well in hand. Draco thought it was probably too soon to worry about any romantic entanglements going on between the two. Time would tell, but it wasn't Hermione and Draco's place to intrude on their relationship, whatever it was. Convincing Hermione of that was going to be difficult. Draco guided the women out of the portrait gallery. Rose skipped ahead of them, her hair swinging with each dancing step. Weasley was gone, and it was time to move on to the next stage of their lives.